Your money is ours, old man. Michael raised his glass of wine, his thin smile cutting through the air like a blade. The whole room fell silent, the only sound the soft crackling of the candle burning on the dinner table. I, Edward 72, never imagined the day would come when my own son-in-law would spit straight into my pride. In his eyes there was no trace of the respect once owed to the father-in-law who had opened his arms to him. All that remained was arrogance, coldness, and a darkness deeper than any nightmare I had ever known. I remember it vividly, the day he held my daughter's hand and stepped into our home, calling me Dad, with warmth in his voice. I trusted him. I thought I had gained another son. Yet here we were tonight, over drinks, as he publicly declared his claim over everything I had spent a lifetime saving, like I was nothing more than some useless old man waiting to be pushed aside. My heart pounded, my hands trembled, but one question kept echoing in my head. Was this only the beginning of the darkness he was about to unleash on my life? What happened after those words was far crueler than you can imagine. Stay with me. The truth behind that smile will leave you speechless. I am Edward, 72 years old, an old man who has long crossed the far side of life's hill. People around town call me the old carpenter, because I've spent my whole life with the scent of pine, the steady rasp of the saw, and these calloused hands that have built more chairs, tables, and door frames than I could ever count for this little town. I used to believe that honest work and quiet sacrifice for my family would be enough to earn me a peaceful ending. I was wrong. My life was never rich, but it was never lacking either. With my wife, Mary, I built a modest home. We had one daughter, Anna. When Mary passed away too soon, the emptiness was so heavy that I buried myself in work just to keep going and raise my girl. I still remember those freezing mornings, pedaling over 10 kilometers with a small lunchbox, saving every coin so I could buy Anna a new pair of shoes. She was my whole hope, the anchor that kept me standing against loneliness. When Anna grew up, I watched her walk down the aisle in her wedding dress with both pride and worry tangled in my chest, especially when she introduced me to Michael, a tall, polite man with a confident voice. I saw in him a husband, a future father, someone who could carry our family forward. I still recall that first dinner. Michael clasped my hand, looked me in the eye, and said, "Dad," with respect. My heart softened instantly. I thought Mary must be smiling from above, but the sweeter the memory, the more bitter the present feels. I think back to the little wooden house I built with my own hands in 1980, every plank carefully chosen, every tile laid with care. Inside that home, Anna once ran across the floor calling, "Daddy, wait for me," and I scooped her up, kissing her sun-warmed hair. It all felt eternal, until Michael stepped in. To me, family has always been sacred. I never imagined the day would come when the very man I once welcomed as a son would be the one to tear it apart. But that night, when he raised his glass and spoke the words, "Your money is ours, old man," I understood. Every ounce of trust I had given him was nothing more than fuel for his ambition, and all the beautiful pieces of the past now lay shattered, like broken glass. If someone were to ask me the happiest moment of my life, I would answer without hesitation. It was the day Anna laughed brightly in the backyard, bathed in the golden light of sunset, holding a small piece of wood I had just sawed. She shouted innocently, "Daddy, look! I'm helping you build!" I burst out laughing, wrapped her in my arms, and thought to myself, as long as I had her, I could withstand any storm. Those memories have always kept me warm, even as life slowly grew harsher. Anna grew up, studied hard, and gradually drifted out of my arms. Still, I stayed by her side, saving every penny to give her a better future. I never thought about keeping anything for myself. Everything I did, I saved for Anna. So when Michael appeared, I saw it as a beautiful milestone. I thought Anna had finally found a shoulder to lean on, that our family would gain another protective hand, a man who knew how to share responsibility. Michael spoke smoothly, acted politely, and looked at Anna with what seemed like love. I trusted him completely, but somewhere, beneath those sweet words, I began to sense something different. Michael often asked about the house, about the savings in the bank, about the insurance I had taken out back when Mary was still alive. At first, I thought it was just the concern of a young husband who wanted to provide for his wife. I told myself, maybe he just wants to make sure Anna won't have to worry when I grow old. But the instinct of an old man whispered that something was wrong. I remember once when Anna and I were sitting in the kitchen, Michael walked in. He put a hand on Anna's shoulder and said softly, but just loud enough for me to hear, "Your dad's getting old, honey. One day, We'll be the ones managing everything. My heart froze, a sharp ache running through me, but Anna just laughed it off, thinking it was a joke. I stayed silent. I didn't want to shatter that fragile peace. I chose to trust. I chose silence. And that silence opened the door to the nightmare. Because one day, at a family dinner, under the glow of warm lights and the sound of clinking glasses, Michael raised his wine glass, curled his lips into a sinister smile, and spoke the words I will never forget. Your money is ours, old man. In that very moment, every memory of love, of family, of sacrifice, shattered like glass hitting the cold, hard floor. After that fateful dinner, I thought everything would end with a careless remark. But I was wrong. Michael's words weren't a moment of rashness. They were the announcement of a long-planned scheme he had been preparing for years. The very next day, I found a stack of bank papers on the desk in the living room. I knew I hadn't left them there. When I opened them, my heart clenched. There were statements from my savings account, along with the life insurance policy I'd taken out back in 1995. I had never given any of these to Michael. Yet somehow, he had them all. I walked straight into the room where he was sitting with Anna. How did you get these papers? I asked. Michael didn't even blink. He looked up and gave a thin smile. Dad, I'm just trying to help organize things so everything will be clear later. You've been a little forgetful. What if you lose them? I was choking on anger, but when I glanced at Anna, she only nodded softly, convinced her husband was truly looking out for me. I didn't want to look like a grumpy old man in her eyes, so I swallowed my rage, but a bad feeling was growing inside me. In the days that followed, Michael began inserting himself deeper into my life. He went with me to the bank, pretending to help fill out forms. More than once, he gently suggested I sign over the authority to manage my monthly interest to him. I refused. Then he turned to Anna, persuading her that it would be more convenient and safer for Dad that way. Little by little, I was being pushed to the edges of my own home. At night, while I sat reading the paper, Michael and Anna whispered about remodeling the house, about selling the small plot of land on the outskirts of town, the things I had spent my life saving for. When I spoke up, Michael just chuckled. Dad, you don't need to worry. Times have changed. Old folks like you should just rest. This property will belong to us anyway. The words cut like a knife. I looked at Anna, hoping she would speak up for me, but she stayed silent, her eyes turned away. I knew love and softness had made her blind. It didn't stop there. Michael began spreading stories. He told the neighbors I was becoming forgetful, that I sometimes left doors unlocked, that I couldn't remember dates. A few times he even moved my car keys himself and then questioned me, making me look confused. Small acts, whispered rumors, all crafting an image of Edward, the senile old man no longer capable of looking after himself. I realized Michael was staging an entire play and I was the character being torn down, and the most tragic spectator was my daughter Anna, slowly coming to believe her father was truly old and useless. The quiet years after Mary's death seemed to have turned their back on me. Now I felt cornered, the shadows of Michael's schemes creeping into every crack of my life. And I knew this was only the beginning. Just a few weeks later, the signs of Michael's scheme became impossible to ignore. He no longer limited himself to malicious rumors or clumsy little tricks. He began turning me into a laughingstock right in front of my own family. One Sunday evening, the whole family gathered for dinner. Out of nowhere, Michael said, Yesterday, Dad tried to withdraw money from the bank but signed the wrong form. Luckily, I was there in time. Every pair of eyes turned to me. I froze, unable to recall anything like that. Michael went on, his voice laced with pity. I think Dad's getting forgetful. Maybe it's time we let the younger ones handle the paperwork. The table gave an awkward chuckle. Anna looked at me with concern. I wanted to protest, but the more I tried to explain, the more my voice trembled. In their eyes, I was exactly what Michael wanted them to see, a confused old man. Michael smiled, raised his glass, and in that moment I understood. He was carefully building a public case for Edward is losing his mind. It didn't stop there. He started taking me to see a psychiatrist. At first, Anna tried to reassure me. Dad, it's just a checkup. I just want to make sure you're healthy. I didn't want to upset her, so I reluctantly agreed. But when we got to the clinic, I saw Michael had already gathered my old medical records, heart exams, blood pressure prescriptions. He handed everything to the doctor, exaggerating every symptom. After the appointment, I held a paper that read, "Further monitoring recommended for memory and cognitive function." That was the missing piece of his plan. With just a few more incidents, Michael could go to court and petition for guardianship. And once that happened, everything I'd saved over a lifetime would legally fall into his hands. In the days that followed, I lived in constant fear. I locked the doors carefully, hid documents in places only I knew. But Michael always found ways to interfere. Once I discovered someone had opened the drawer in my bedroom, the envelope with the house deed was out of place. When I asked Anna, she swore she knew nothing. Deep down, I knew there was only one person cunning enough to do it. The breaking point came one morning when I went to the bank to withdraw some cash to fix the roof. The clerk looked at me apologetically and said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Edward, but this account now has a co-owner. You can't withdraw the full amount without the other person's signature." I went numb. The co-owner was Michael. He had persuaded Anna to sign the bank papers under the guise of helping Dad manage things more safely. I clutched the failed withdrawal slip, my chest aching as if I'd been punched. From a father who was once the pillar of his family, I had been reduced to a powerless man inside my own home. I saw clearly now. Michael didn't just want money. He wanted to strip me of my dignity, of my last voice. I began to lose sleep. Night after night, I lay awake listening to the clock tick, picturing this house, Mary's mementos, the sweat of my lifetime, being sold off under his hands. And the more I thought about it, the more I felt I was being driven into a corner, but I swore to myself, I will not let him win. I was used to stepping out on the porch each morning, taking a deep breath of old wood and hot coffee, but once Michael started tightening his grip, even that small peace was gone. One morning there was a knock at the door. Two men in suits came, calling themselves loan officers, there to discuss a mortgage. I was stunned. I had never borrowed money, and this house had never been mortgaged. But they handed me a packet of papers with my signature on them. The scrawl looked like mine, messy, but unmistakably my handwriting. Only thing was, I never signed those documents. I flipped through the file and realized Michael had used a trick. He'd once brought me a stack of papers asking me to sign to update the insurance, and I'd signed without paying attention. Buried in that stack was a mortgage form. If it hadn't been stopped, the house I'd lived in for more than 40 years would have gone to him and the bank. I ran to Anna. "Anna, you have to listen to me." Michael's lying. He forged my signature. She looked at me, torn between confusion and fear. "Dad, but Michael said you agreed. I even saw the papers. Your signature is right there." My throat closed. My only child, my blood, trusted my son-in-law over me. Michael appeared then, throwing an arm around Anna's shoulders, his voice calm and full of implication. "Dad, you seem tired. Maybe you should rest. Let me and Anna handle it. You don't need the stress." I wanted to lunge and punch that smooth face, but my old hands shook. All I could do was watch him wear that triumphant smile. In the days that followed, Michael grew bolder. He brought a real estate agent to the house. They walked the property together, measuring, taking pictures, talking about market price. I stood in the kitchen and heard them say, "This plot would fetch a pretty penny. Someone will buy fast." My heart dropped. Every inch of land I'd worked, every tree Mary planted, was being priced like merchandise. Worse, Michael started using threats. Whenever I objected, he lowered his voice and menaced. "Who's going to believe you? Not even Anna. You're just an old man losing it. One more signature and everything's ours. Resist, and you'll lose everything." I stayed silent, but inside a slow-burning fire grew. I wasn't only afraid of losing money or the house. I was terrified of losing my dignity, of losing the father my daughter used to be proud of. That night, I sat in my study and pulled out an old photo album. Inside was a picture of me holding 5-year-old Anna, her hair sun-bleached, her grin wide. I whispered, "Mary, see this? He's destroying everything, but I won't let him take our daughter or our family." I knew that if I kept quiet, tomorrow this house would no longer be called Edwards. Michael would turn me into a shadow in the home I built. Then all hope would end. I clutched the album until my hands ached, tears staining the worn cover. Then I told myself, it's time to fight back. The nightmare reached its peak on a rainy afternoon. I'd just come back from the old workshop when I saw an unfamiliar car parked at the gate. Inside the house, I found Michael sitting with two suited strangers, a stack of paperwork spread out on the table. "Dad, we need to have a serious talk," he said, his tone no longer pretending to be friendly. I squinted at the papers. They were transfer of ownership documents. My heart sank. I flipped to the first page and saw my name printed under transferor. Michael pushed a pen toward me, his voice ice cold. You just need to sign. It'll be tidy. You can still stay here, but management will be up to Anna and me. You should think about your daughter's future. My whole body shook. For months he had been piling pressure on me, inventing stories until people believed I was out of my mind. Now he was calmly setting the final trap. I'm not signing, I said, my voice hoarse. Michael shrugged and turned toward Anna, who was coming down the stairs. See, he's getting stubborn. If this keeps up, everything will fall apart and you'll have to carry it all. I just want to protect you. Anna looked at me, torn. I could see the struggle in her eyes, trust in her husband on one side, love for her father on the other. Then Michael gripped her hand and whispered something. Anna nodded and fell silent. In that moment, it felt like I'd fallen off a cliff. I realized I was almost completely isolated. He didn't just want money. He wanted to sever the last tie between me and my daughter. In the days that followed, Michael's nature became unmistakable. He openly called me old man instead of dad. He controlled every household expense and used safety as an excuse to cut off my bank cards. If I wanted to buy wood for the shop, I had to ask the person living in my house for money. It was utter humiliation. But in the depths of despair, a sliver of light appeared. One night, while Michael was out, I found a bill stuffed in the pocket of the jacket he'd thrown on a chair. It showed a very large transfer to another account, and in the corner my forged signature. My hands trembled as I held the paper. This could be the one piece of proof to turn things around. I hid the bill inside Mary's photo album, where Michael would never think to look. For the first time in months, a small hope stirred. I looked around the house, every panel of wood soaked with memories, and whispered, Michael, this game isn't over. The old man you look down on will show you that justice still exists. The rain kept falling outside, but inside me a fire of resistance flared up. The time of being pushed around was over. It was time to strike back. That Sunday, the little church at the end of town was packed. It was the congregation's 50th anniversary, so every family in the neighborhood was there. I wore my old suit and walked slowly, but my heart was set on a decision. I would use this place to expose Michael. When I entered the main hall, I saw Michael and Anna shaking hands and smiling, behaving as if he were the perfect husband and devoted son-in-law. He raised a glass in greeting and draped an arm around Anna in front of admiring eyes. I stood still, clutching the transfer receipt in my jacket pocket, the proof that would reveal his true face. After the pastor's short sermon, people began to sit down at the long tables. I stood and tapped my glass to get everyone's attention. My voice trembled at first, but grew firmer as I spoke. I'd like to say a few words. Many of you know me, Edward. I've lived in this town my whole life, worked as a carpenter, and now I'm an old man retired. But today I have to speak up about my son-in-law. The room went suddenly quiet. Michael turned and looked at me, the smile still glued to his face, but his eyes sharp with caution. I went on. In recent months, Michael has been inventing stories, claiming I'm losing my mind and not fit to manage my affairs. He has forged my signature and moved large sums of money out. This, I pulled the receipt from my pocket, is the proof. Murmurs spread. Anna froze, her eyes wide. Michael stepped forward with a mocking laugh. Dad, not this again. Look, my father's old, forgetful, and mixes things up. There must be some misunderstanding about this receipt. I tightened my voice and looked straight at him. Don't call me Dad anymore. A man who disrespects his family and steals what isn't his doesn't deserve that name. A ripple of whispers moved through the hall. A few neighbors whose doors I'd fixed or furniture I'd built stood up to back me. That can't be. I trust Edward. He's been decent his whole life. If there's a forgery, that's a crime. Michael kept his composure outwardly, though I saw the veins at his temple. He leaned toward Anna and whispered, Don't let him fool you. He's not sound anymore. I'll take care of everything. I watched Anna begin to cry, torn, not knowing who to believe. But in that instant I knew I'd taken the first step. I had lifted Michael's mask in front of the whole community. From now on, he could no longer bend the truth so easily. The air in the church felt thick. I could see every gaze turning toward Michael, some skeptical, some curious, some plainly suspicious. He noticed and immediately laughed loudly, clapping a few times as if to break the tension. Everyone, don't misunderstand. My father, Mr. Edward, he's not stable these days. That receipt, it could be a draft, a clerical error. I handle his finances directly, so I know. Don't let him alarm you. He spoke loudly and confidently, and a few people nodded. I wouldn't let him take control. I stepped forward, looked him straight in the eye, and spoke with a steady tone. Michael, you may fool some people for a little while, but you can't fool the truth. You think I'm losing it? Then explain why this receipt has a bank stamp, the reconciliation officer's signature, and a full account number. Anyone can verify it at any time. I handed the paper to the pastor. He frowned as he studied it. A few neighbors I knew leaned in to look as well. The looks of doubt shifted squarely onto Michael. He began to lose his patience. I could see his face flush, his smile forced. Then suddenly he slammed the table, his voice low and sharp. Enough! Are you trying to disgrace me in front of everyone? Do you know how much pain this will cause Anna? Anna stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. She turned to me, her voice trembling. Dad, is this true? Or are you just too scared? That question felt like a blade to my heart. My daughter, the little girl who used to trust me without question, was doubting me now, but I knew if I didn't hold firm, everything would fall apart. I took a deep breath, my voice hoarse but firm. Anna, you grew up in this house. You know what your father is like. I did everything for you, but you have to open your eyes and see. The man you call your husband is the one who's been destroying our family day by day. A murmur rippled through the hall. An old friend of mine, Mr. Miller, who'd been a regular customer at my shop, stood up and spoke loudly. I've known Edward for over 40 years. He would never make something like this up. If there's paperwork, we need to get to the bottom of it. Michael, you can't just deny it. Michael was momentarily speechless. Fury flashed in his eyes. He grabbed Anna's hand tightly, as if to control her thoughts, but Anna's expression was starting to waver. I knew this wasn't victory yet, but it was a deep crack in the wall of lies Michael had built. That crack, if I stayed patient, would soon split wide open. I clenched my fist and thought, Michael, your charade is about to end. The whispers in the hall rose like a tide. The pastor cleared his throat softly, but nobody paid attention. Every eye was fixed on Michael and me. Michael squeezed Anna's hand until it went white, his tone haughty. You can stage as many scenes as you like, but the truth is you're old and out of control. Doing this only shames Anna in front of everyone. I looked him square in the eye and didn't lower my voice. Shame? The real shame is worn by a man who calls himself a son-in-law while plotting to steal from the family that treated him like a son. The shame is forging my signature, deceiving your wife, and abusing the trust of this household. That's shame, Michael. The air grew so heavy you could hear your heartbeat. Then unexpectedly, Mr. Miller spoke up. If you're clean, Michael, you won't be afraid of an investigation, will you? I propose we form a witness group and go with Edward and his daughter to the bank to check this transaction thoroughly. Heads nodded all around. For a moment I saw Michael go pale, but he quickly forced his composure back. All right, I have nothing to fear. But remember, if this is just a misunderstanding, your father will be the one to apologize to me in front of everyone. He spoke bravely, but I caught a flicker of unease in his eyes. Anna saw it too. She pulled her hand from his, taking a small step back. In that instant I knew she was beginning to doubt. I stepped forward, my voice clearer and stronger than ever. You want me to apologize in public? Fine. But if the truth shows you forged documents, where will you apologize? Here, in front of this whole community, or in court, where justice won't let lies stand. The hall erupted into conversation. Michael went rigid, his lips pressed tight. For a moment I saw his false facade crack. The pastor came over, put a hand on my shoulder, and turned to Michael. If there's nothing to hide, you have no cause for fear. The church stands for truth. We will get to the bottom of this together. Anna looked at me, eyes full of tears, and whispered, Dad, I'm sorry I doubted you. My chest tightened, but at the same time a light broke through months of darkness. I knew this public confrontation was only the beginning. Michael wouldn't give up easily. He would fight back by any means. But at least today I was no longer alone. As the church bells rang, I clutched the receipt in my hand. This would be the first arrow aimed at Michael's wall of lies, and I vowed the real battle has only just begun. After the public confrontation at church, I knew I had to do something I'd rarely done in my life, use the law to defend the truth. As a carpenter, I'm used to making things with my hands, but now I had to work with lawyers and courts. Strange tools, but necessary to bring the truth into the light. I went to see an old neighbor of mine, Mrs. Helen, who used to work as a credit union secretary. She studied the receipt carefully and said, "Edward, this is no joke. That signature is suspicious in many places. You need to copy every document and show them to a lawyer." I followed her advice, nervous but hopeful. The next day I went to a small law office on the corner, Mr. Carter, a steady middle-aged lawyer with a sharp eye. I put Mary's photo album with the forged receipt, the bank statements, and a few photos of Michael with bank staff on his desk. Mr. Carter flipped through them, tapped his pen, and said, "We can sue for forgery and abuse of trust and request a temporary freeze on the transactions, but be prepared for a long fight. He may countersue." Hearing that shook me a little, but when I thought of the house, of Mary's picture, I swallowed my fear and answered firmly, "I'll stake my whole life to get justice." Mr. Carter got to work right away. He sent a formal request to the bank to freeze the transfers, asked for CCTV footage from the suspect dates, and filed a complaint with the investigators. I felt the weight of each signature on the legal papers, no longer just ink on paper, but weapons to protect my honor. Michael didn't sit still. He hired his own lawyer and visited Mr. Carter's office under the guise of negotiation, but really to probe for weaknesses. One afternoon he showed up at my door, arrogant. "You're making a big deal out of nothing, Edward. The world isn't what it used to be. The law won't save you." I answered with a calm I hardly recognized in myself. "If the law can't fix it, I'll make this public by any means. I'm not afraid of your lies anymore." In the weeks that followed, Mr. Carter and I gathered evidence, inspecting seals, getting a handwriting expert to compare signatures, pulling account statements, and requesting the transaction history. They found a pattern of small transfers designed to draw less attention before being consolidated into a large outgoing sum. One afternoon, when I received the legal report, my hands trembled so badly I could barely set the paper down. It read, in part, "There are signs of forged signatures and abuse of authorization. Prosecution recommended if evidence is sufficient." My heart pounded and tears stung my eyes. I thought of Mary and the late-night hours in my shop. Everything I'd worked for was finally being recognized as harm done to me. But Mr. Carter cautioned me. "He will fight back. He might spread rumors that you filed suit because you're senile, or he might try to destroy evidence. Be careful. Keep every original, and don't be provoked." I nodded and held the album tight, the place where I'd hidden the forged receipt. For the first time in months, I felt I had a true ally. Not just kind neighbors, but a competent legal team. This was the start of a battle of wits I knew wouldn't be easy, but it had to be fought. For my daughter, for Mary's memory, and for my own honor. The days that followed were a race against time. Mr. Carter urged me to sign the official petition to the county court, demanding a full review of every transaction tied to my account over the past 12 months. After repeated delays, the bank finally had no choice but to cooperate. I still remember that morning when we received the thick file stuffed with numbers, dates, and transaction codes. I'm a carpenter. I don't understand complicated financial symbols. But Mr. Carter carefully broke it down for me. "See here. In June, there were 3 cash withdrawals, each just under $5,000, right below the threshold that triggers special scrutiny, all signed Edward, but the handwriting is shaky and inconsistent. This is a classic sign of forgery." Hearing that made my heart ache and burn with anger. Michael wasn't just greedy, he was calculated step by step. I asked, "Is this enough to sue him?" Mr. Carter nodded. "Civilly, yes. For criminal charges, we'll need a handwriting expert's formal assessment." Just when I thought the door to justice was opening, Michael struck back. He hired a high-powered attorney from the city, Mrs. Jensen, known for her toughness and razor-sharp tactics. Within a week, I received notice. Michael had filed a countersuit, claiming I was legally incompetent and asking the court to appoint a guardian, himself, of course. I was stunned. If the court believed him, my lawsuit would be worthless. I'd be branded a senile old man whose testimony carried no weight. Everything I'd built with sweat and years could be signed away with one stroke of a judge's pen. Mr. Carter stayed calm. "We're not going to let him turn this around. You'll undergo an independent medical evaluation to prove you're perfectly capable. I've already contacted a reputable neurologist to testify." The following days were filled with tests, short-term memory drills, reflex checks, concentration exercises. I gave it everything I had, even though I was terrified inside. When the doctor smiled and concluded, "Mr. Edward is fully competent, only showing normal age-related changes," tears of relief rolled down my cheeks. While I was fighting to prove my sanity, Michael tried another move. He produced audio clips of me stumbling over dates, or losing my temper and shouting at him. Hearing them, I barely recognized myself, an old man sounding helpless. But Mr. Carter stayed unfazed. "These snippets mean nothing out of context. We'll demand the full recordings, start to finish. When that happens, the truth will come out." Step by step, I realized this was no longer just a family dispute, but a real legal war. Michael, who once hid behind smiles and sweet words, was now exposed for what he was, a man willing to use any trick, even turning his father-in-law into a senile old man in court to steal what wasn't his. But this time was different. I wasn't alone anymore. I had a lawyer, evidence, neighbors willing to testify. And most of all, I had a resolve not to let my life end in humiliation and theft. I knew the legal battle had only just begun, and it would be fiercer than anything I had ever faced. The day of the preliminary hearing, the courtroom was packed. I sat in the front row, my hands clasped together, trembling but my eyes steady. Across from me, Michael wore an expensive suit, lips curled in a confident smirk. He was certain his attorney, Monsieur Jensen, would break me down within minutes of questioning. The judge called the session to order and asked both sides to present their cases. Mr. Carter rose, his voice calm but firm. "Your Honor, this case is about forgery, abuse of trust, and misappropriation of assets. We have solid evidence, bank statements, forged signatures, and expert testimony to support our claim." He placed a thick file on the table, the same file that held the transfer slip I'd guarded for months. The judge picked it up, his brows tightening as he examined the irregular strokes in the signature. I stole a glance at Michael. For a brief second his face faltered, but he quickly masked it with composure. Then Mrs. Jensen stepped forward, a cold smile on her lips. "Your Honor, my client, Michael, has only done what any devoted son-in-law would, manage his father-in-law's finances as the man's memory declines. We have witnesses, recordings, and even medical opinions suggesting that Mr. Edward suffers from cognitive impairment." She then played an audio clip, my own shaky voice, fumbling with dates, mixing up events. A ripple of whispers moved through the courtroom. My face burned with shame. It felt as if the world had turned against me, but Carter stood immediately. "Your Honor, this recording is selectively edited. We request the full version be played." The audio continued, this time uncut. My voice was clear. "Why are you asking me to sign another document? This doesn't look like insurance paperwork." And Michael's rushed reply followed. "It's just a minor formality. Don't worry about it." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Michael's face went pale. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead. Ms. Jensen, rattled, cut in quickly. "This recording hasn't been authenticated." But the judge struck the gavel. "The court will order forensic review of the recording. In the meantime, I'm issuing a temporary injunction. All transactions involving Mr. Edward's assets are to be frozen. No withdrawals, no transfers until this matter is resolved." The room buzzed like it had exploded. I saw Michael sink into his chair, eyes burning with rage. The smug grin he once wore was gone, replaced by the cold, trapped glare of a cornered predator. I exhaled deeply, looking toward the tall courtroom window where sunlight streamed in. For the first time, I felt the law not just listening, but protecting me. Yet I knew this wasn't over. Michael wouldn't stay down. He'd fight back with rumors, lies, whatever weapons he had left. This legal battle was far from finished. This was just one round in a much larger war. After the court ordered a freeze on my assets, I thought I could finally breathe. But Michael wasn't finished. He simply switched tactics. Instead of fighting in the courtroom, he turned to the court of public opinion. He knew that even if I won legally, if he managed to brand me as the senile old man in the eyes of the community, my dignity would be gone forever. The next morning, I woke to whispers outside my house. A local gossip site had posted a sensational article stitched together from cut-up recordings and half-truths. The headline screamed, "Wealthy carpenter, son-in-law reveals the painful truth." My old photo sat beneath it, paired with selective quotes. Comments piled up fast, mocking, cruel, pitying. Reading them felt like a knife to the chest. Michael didn't post it himself. He was smarter than that. A few popular accounts seeded the story, and soon neighbors were sharing it without question. By noon, it had spread to the cafe, the grocery store, the flea market, places where everyone once knew me by name. The town felt split down the middle. Mr. Carter told me we needed a strategy. Trace the fake accounts, petition the court to take down defamatory posts, and if necessary, sue for libel. But the law always moves slower than rumor. Social media travels faster than any judge's order. Anna was caught in the storm. One night she burst into my room, her eyes red from crying. Dad, I read what they're saying. They claim you cheated the family. They say you're losing your mind. I held her hand, forcing my voice to stay calm. Don't believe the noise. As long as we keep the evidence, the truth will win. Inside, though, I was in knots. So I took a different approach. I went door to door. I visited old customers, neighbors I'd once built tables or fixed doors for, and handed them copies of the forged slip, the verified statements, the expert reports. I told them the story in my own plain voice. Some listened quietly, some stayed skeptical, but a few promised they'd wait for the court's decision. Those small sparks of trust felt like bricks laid across the river of doubt. Meanwhile, Michael doubled down. He invited a local blogger into his home, feeding him half-truths about an old man being manipulated. He slipped the blogger edited recordings and suggestive quotes. The piece that came out looked balanced, but the headline was bait, and the photos showed me tired, worn, defeated. That article spread like wildfire, too. I made a choice. I wouldn't fight in comment sections where my words could be twisted. Instead, with Carter's help, I issued a formal statement, signed by my doctor, backed by handwriting experts, demanding retractions and corrections. I also agreed to an interview with a fair-minded local journalist. On camera, I spoke slowly, clearly, laying out the facts without bitterness or theatrics. The shift was small at first, but noticeable. Some posts were deleted. A few comments changed tone. Conversations in town began to move from "the old man is a fraud" to "maybe we should wait for the court." It wasn't a victory yet, but it was a turning point. I reminded myself, sweet words can buy sympathy, but no amount of spin can bury hard evidence. And I refused to let my voice be silenced. Michael refused to back down. Instead of waiting for the court, he went straight for my weakest point, my reputation. One morning, a local online paper suddenly ran a hit piece with a sneering headline, "Carpenter's past resurfaces debt and scandal." Inside were carefully spun lies, whispers that I once borrowed from loan sharks, that I'd had screaming fights with neighbors, even cruel insinuations about Mary's past that made people gossip. The article cited anonymous sources and blurry photos, just enough to make readers doubt me. Anna called, her voice breaking. "Dad, it's everywhere." Michael sent it to the press, too. I looked at my daughter's face and saw the shame of a family name being dragged through the mud. Anger surged inside me, but anger alone wouldn't save us. What I needed was strategy. Mr. Carter advised, "Don't fight rumor with more words. Fight it with proof." Together we began tracing the story back. Who pitched the article? Who paid for its ads? Was there a direct link between Michael and the editor? Soon, we uncovered suspicious emails and small transfers from one of Michael's old real estate accounts, clear signs he was bankrolling the smear. But financial traces weren't enough to calm the storm of public opinion. So I went on a fence. I called in a fair-minded journalist I once helped fix a house for, and invited him into my workshop. On camera, I shared my life. The nights I worked with calloused hands, the unpaid bills I slowly cleared, the sweater Mary left behind. I showed him my ledger, clean repayment records, cleared loans, tax documents, and letters from neighbors confirming I'd never been a public nuisance. Meanwhile, Carter released a short legal brief that broke down the lies in the article, attaching bank receipts, debt clearance slips, and witness statements. We sent it straight to the paper, demanding a public correction. At the same time, we posted it in the local community group alongside the interview where I spoke calmly and clearly, telling the truth without anger. The strategy worked. People who once rushed to believe the gossip began saying, "Let's wait for the court." A local blogger even published a counter-article pointing out clear signs of media manipulation. Slowly, a small but solid wave of support began to grow. Old customers posted photos of furniture I'd built, telling stories of how I once repaired things for free for the elderly. Trust, fragile as it was, began trickling back. Michael saw the shift and tried harder, dropping snide comments in community chats, paying a local influencer to post shady insinuations. But every move he made was met with cold, hard evidence receipts, witness testimony, video clips. Each trick of his was countered with a document that couldn't be denied. The media battle had become a race of speed and truth. Who could present facts faster? Who could bring the story back to verifiable ground? I no longer had the luxury of despair. I stood in front of the camera, looking straight into the lens, and spoke with steady conviction. My name is Edward. I am a father, a carpenter, and I will not let lies bury a lifetime of work and honor. Within just a few weeks, the tide began to turn. One by one, the smear articles about me were either taken down or published with corrections. In the local community forum, comments of support started to appear. Edward's been an honest craftsman his whole life. How could a few headlines make him a villain? Dozens of former customers shared memories of the tables and chairs I'd built, of the times I repaired homes for free for families in need. A small hashtag began spreading, #Stand with Edward. I was stunned, moved to tears, seeing people I thought had abandoned me now standing up in my defense. Their real-life stories were the strongest antidote against fake news. Even Anna began to change. One evening she came to me, her eyes still wet. "Dad, I read everything. I'm sorry I didn't believe you sooner." I held her in my arms, and for the first time in months I no longer felt alone, but Michael wasn't about to surrender. Furious that public opinion had shifted toward me, he struck back. He hired an anonymous crew to flood social media with fake accounts claiming I had bribed the press, and that all the documents were AI forgeries. Overnight, the lies spread, and by morning the forums were drowning in fresh doubt. Then he sank even lower, sending anonymous messages to some of my neighbors, threatening to expose private secrets if they kept supporting me. One elderly woman who had testified for me broke down in tears after receiving one of those threats. I burned with rage, but Carter pulled me back. "This is where you stay calm," he warned. "Witness intimidation is a serious crime. If we catch him, it'll be the blow that finishes him." And then, our chance came. One of the victims had saved the phone number and message. Tracing it back, investigators discovered it was a burner SIM, but the payment trail revealed a credit card registered under none other than Michael himself. When that report was made public in the community group, even the skeptics were stunned. For the first time, people openly named him. Michael is the liar. The very supporters who once defended him now turned, their words like knives. The image of the polished, respectful son-in-law he'd crafted for years collapsed in a single moment. Michael lost control. He stormed into the forums, posting long-winded rants, cursing anyone who opposed him. But the more he wrote, the more his mask slipped. No one saw a devoted husband anymore, only a greedy, unhinged man unraveling in public. I sat quietly in front of the screen, reading each comment. A strange sense of comfort washed over me. After years of guarding my honor, people could finally see his true face, but deep down I knew this wasn't the end. Michael would never stop here. He still had one last card to play, dragging me back to court, the one place he believed the law could restore his shattered image. And I knew it too. The greatest battle was still waiting, inside the courtroom. The day of the official trial arrived. I walked into the courtroom on unsteady legs, silently reminding myself to stay strong. It felt like the whole town had come. Neighbors, friends, even those who once doubted me. Across the aisle, Michael sat upright in his tailored suit, face blank. But in his eyes, I caught something new, an edge of tension replacing his old confidence. The judge struck the gavel, declaring the session open. Both attorneys stepped forward. Carter, my steadfast ally through all this, spoke first. His voice was calm but unshakable. "Your Honor, this case concerns forged signatures, financial fraud, and the intimidation of witnesses. We will show that the defendant, Michael, deliberately constructed a false image of his father-in-law as senile in order to seize his lawful assets." He laid out stacks of evidence, wire transfer receipts, a handwriting expert's report, the unedited audio recording, and a payment record tracing the burner phone used to threaten a witness. Each time a new document hit the table, a wave of murmurs swept through the gallery. I sat there gripping my hands, feeling as if the bricks I had laid across a lifetime were slowly being set back in place. Then came Jensen, Michael's attorney. She strode forward with a cold smile. "Your Honor, my client acted only as a responsible husband and son-in-law. Mr. Edward, at his advanced age, clearly shows signs of cognitive decline, Michael's role in managing the finances was both natural and necessary. As for the plaintiff's evidence, it may simply be a misunderstanding or even fabrication. She called her first witness, a bank employee. He testified that he had seen Michael accompany me several times and that I had indeed signed the forms. My throat tightened. Then Jensen played a clipped recording, my own voice shouting, "Don't force me to sign! Don't force me!" But she stopped the playback just before Michael's evasive response. The courtroom buzzed. I could see doubt flicker back into a few faces. My heart ached, but Carter signaled for me to stay calm. He rose and demanded the court play the full, uncut recording. When my voice rang out clearly, "Why did you tell me this was an insurance form when it isn't? Why are you tricking me into signing?" The room erupted. Heads turned sharply toward Michael, eyes narrowing in disbelief. Jensen tried to counter, brushing it off as a simple miscommunication. But Carter wasn't done. He unveiled the handwriting analysis, pointing out the irregular strokes, proof that the bank signatures were not mine. And then he delivered the knockout. The payment record for the burner sim used to threaten a witness, tied directly to Michael's personal credit card. The tension in the room was suffocating. Michael sat rigid, his face drained of color. I saw the veins bulge in his clenched fists as he swallowed his fury. But to everyone watching, the polished mask he had worn for so long was shattering piece by piece. The judge frowned and struck the gavel for order. The court will continue to examine this evidence, but it is clear there are troubling irregularities. We will now hear from the next witness. The doors opened. A familiar figure walked in, Mrs. Helen, my neighbor who had first noticed the oddities in the signatures. She clutched a folder to her chest, her eyes firm and unwavering. And in that moment, I knew this was only the beginning of the testimony that would drive Michael into a corner. Mrs. Helen stepped up to the witness stand, her frame small but her voice steady and clear. She handed the judge a stack of photocopied papers. "I used to be a credit union secretary, and I'm very familiar with Mr. Edwards' signature. When I saw Michael showing documents at the bank, I noticed right away. Here's a comparison between Mr. Edwards' signature over the years and the one on the recent file. It clearly shows signs of forgery." The courtroom went dead silent. The judge examined the papers carefully, then nodded and passed them on to the handwriting expert. Mr. Carter quickly added, "We've had an independent expert analyze this. The report shows 11 key differences in the pen strokes. The match rate is only 40%, far below the 95% required to confirm it's the same person's signature." Michael began to lose his composure. He leaned toward Attorney Jensen, whispering something under his breath, but things only got worse when the next witness came in. Mr. Miller, my longtime friend. He recounted, in detail, the time he saw Michael bring over documents, insisting I sign them. When I refused, Michael made up an excuse about updating the insurance. Miller's voice rang out. "I saw Edward being pressured. That signature wasn't voluntary." Murmurs spread through the courtroom. It was clear many people were beginning to change their opinion. Michael gripped the edge of the table tightly, forcing his face to stay expressionless, but his eyes betrayed the fear inside him. The next blow came from the bank itself. After the court ordered an internal review, a senior employee testified. On the day of the transaction, the security camera recorded Mr. Edward looking confused as he reviewed the documents. Meanwhile, Michael repeatedly covered his hand over the paper and pointed at where Mr. Edward should sign. Here is the video extract. The courtroom screen lit up. I saw myself in the footage, an old man fumbling with a pen while Michael stood beside me, pointing, lips moving. The images were clear, undeniable. A wave of voices rose across the room. "He was forced to sign." Attorney Jensen's face turned pale. She quickly stood up. "Objection. The video has no audio. It doesn't prove what was said." But the judge's tone was cold. "The footage clearly shows suspicious behavior. We'll cross-reference it with the original audio recording." Michael was now cornered. Suddenly he shot to his feet, voice low and harsh. "This is all a setup. Father-in-law is slandering me out of jealousy. I'm the one taking care of Anna, while he's not even of sound mind anymore." His words echoed through the room, but instead of persuading anyone, they only deepened the doubt in people's eyes. Anna sat in the back row, tears streaming down her face as she shook her head. For the first time, I saw my daughter turn her back on her husband's excuses. Mr. Carter seized the moment, his voice sharp as steel. "Your Honor, the defendant has contradicted himself. At first he claimed he was responsibly managing his father-in-law's finances, and now he's blaming this on some so-called conspiracy. But the evidence, signatures, audio, video, witness testimony, every single piece points to one conclusion: Michael forged documents and used coercion. The courtroom erupted in loud discussion. The judge struck the gavel to restore order, but I knew the scales of justice were tipping my way. Michael hung his head, both hands clenched so tightly they trembled. I could hear his heavy breathing echo in the tense silence. The flawless image he had built for years was cracking apart, shards of it falling before everyone's eyes. And in that moment I realized he was no longer just facing me, he was facing the truth and justice itself. The courtroom fell into a suffocating silence. Every eye turned to the judge. Michael still sat there, hands clasped together, trembling though he tried to mask it with a careless expression. I looked at him, and for the first time I felt no fear, only a strange, steady calm. The judge flipped through the documents, his voice firm and resonant. After reviewing the proceedings, this court finds sufficient grounds to conclude that the signatures on the financial documents were not executed by Mr. Edward. The handwriting analysis, surveillance footage, and witness testimonies are consistent and point to one fact: the defendant, Michael, engaged in fraud and abuse of trust. The room stirred with whispers. I held my breath. The judge went on. Furthermore, the threats made against a witness via telephone have been directly linked to the defendant's credit card. This constitutes a serious violation of the law. Therefore, the court rules as follows: all assets and lawful property of Mr. Edward remain intact. Any transactions carried out by Michael are declared void. Additionally, the case will be referred to the criminal investigation authorities for charges of forgery and witness intimidation. The gavel struck, sharp, final, like a blade cutting through every lie. I couldn't hold back my tears. My body shook, but not from fear, this time from overwhelming relief. I lifted my eyes toward the sunlight streaming through the tall windows and whispered in my heart, "Mary, I've finally protected our home." From the back row, Anna burst into tears. She rushed forward, wrapping her arms around me. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I was so blind. I was wrong, Dad." I held her close, our tears blending together. In that moment, every wound I'd carried seemed to soften. And Michael? He suddenly shot up, screaming, "No! This is a conspiracy. He's tricked all of you." Two officers moved in, restraining him as he fought back. His face twisted, his bloodshot eyes fixed on me with rage as if he wanted to devour me, but it was nothing more than helpless fury. As the police led him away, his shouts grew weaker, swallowed by the heavy silence of the courtroom. No one believed him anymore. Those who had once admired his polished manners now looked at him only with disgust and contempt. The judge rose and declared firmly, "This court is adjourned. Justice belongs to the truth." The final strike of the gavel echoed like a seal of certainty. I sat still for a moment, my old, trembling hands holding tightly to Anna's. In my eyes there was no bitterness left, only a renewed faith that even late in life justice exists and truth can triumph over the darkest deceit. When I stepped outside the courthouse, the golden afternoon sun shone brilliantly. People lined the hallway, many reaching out to shake my hand, pat my shoulder, offer congratulations. Some whispered, "Mr. Edward deserves justice." I smiled, my heart light. The long battle had finally reached its end. But for Michael, I knew this was only the beginning of the bitter consequences he was about to face. After the trial, Michael was no longer the polished, charming man people once admired. News of his forged signatures and witness intimidation spread across town, even beyond the neighboring districts. The local papers ran bold headlines: "Greedy son-in-law exposed. Plot to steal father-in-law's assets ends in humiliation." At the real estate firm where Michael once strutted with pride, he became a laughingstock. Clients pulled their contracts, partners cut ties. Within a month, his office was nearly frozen. The company director had no choice but to dismiss him for damaging the firm's reputation. On the day he walked out, not a single colleague bid him farewell, just a few weary shakes of the head. With his reputation shattered, his job gone, even old friends turned their backs. The cocktail parties he once loved to flaunt were no longer open to him. Those who once raised a glass at his side now whispered behind his back, "Michael, just a greedy fool who destroyed himself." Worse still, the debts began to surface. While waiting to seize my property, Michael had lived recklessly. Credit cards funding luxury cars, expensive watches, lavish dinners to prove his success. Now, without an income, those debts dragged him down like stones tied to his feet. Creditors called day and night, letters stacked at his door. I even heard of debt collectors standing outside his house shouting, "Pay up, Michael, stop hiding." If this had happened before, I might have felt pity, but now I saw it only as the inevitable consequence of his choices. At first, Anna still felt a flicker of compassion. She tried to comfort him, urged him to start over, but Michael didn't change. Instead of remorse, he lashed out, blaming her. "If you hadn't betrayed me in court, if you hadn't sided with that old man, I would have won." Anna cried, but no longer argued back. Slowly, she withdrew into silence, distancing herself. One morning, I saw her standing at my door with a suitcase, her eyes swollen from tears. Her voice trembled. "Dad, I can't live with him anymore. I was so foolish to ever believe in him." Hearing that, my heart ached, yet I also felt a strange relief. At last she had stepped out of the shadows. Michael, the man who once raised a glass and sneered, "Your money is ours, old man," now wandered in a rented apartment, buried in debt, his dignity in ruins. Every step he took was followed by eyes filled with scorn, and I knew this was only the beginning of a downfall with no escape. Once Michael strode through the streets in his luxury car, crisp suit and head held high. Now he shuffled along like a shadow, almost invisible. Every time he stepped outside, whispers followed him, fingers pointed his way. The coffee seller at the corner, who used to greet him warmly with "Mr. Michael," now just handed over the cup without even looking at him. Former neighbors shut their doors as he passed, afraid of being associated with him. Worse still, the very people who once toasted with him at lavish parties were the first to turn their backs. A few so-called friends even posted mocking status updates. "Greed ruins you. The liar finally gets what he deserves." Those words spread faster than the news itself, making Michael a running joke across social media. At home, things collapsed completely. Anna couldn't stand the guilt trips and wild accusations any longer. She moved back in with me and filed for divorce, leaving Michael alone in a shabby rental apartment. I heard he smashed furniture and screamed when the divorce papers arrived. But when the police showed up, he was just slumped in a chair, hair a tangled mess, eyes empty. It wasn't only his wife he lost. Anna fought hard to protect their child, too. Michael used to brag about giving the boy a life of luxury. Now, he only saw his child during brief, court-supervised visits. Anna told me that the first time they met again, Michael tried to force a smile, but his hands shook uncontrollably. The child stepped back, clung to his mother, and refused to say a single word of Dad. In that moment, Michael must have realized he'd lost the one thing money could never buy back. Financially, he was buried. Credit card bills, payday loans, and legal fees piled up faster than he could breathe. The luxury condo was repossessed by the bank. The shiny new car was hauled away on a rainy morning. He had no choice but to move into a cramped room on the outskirts of town, with peeling walls and windows that rattled in the wind. The contrast was brutal. Once he raised glasses of red wine at glamorous parties. Now he huddled over instant noodles and a cheap can of beer. At night, the phone never stopped ringing. Debt collectors screaming, threatening, demanding. Each time, he hurled the phone to the floor and buried his head in the dark. But the harshest blow wasn't the money. It was the total rejection by society. Nobody believed a word he said anymore. No company would hire him. Even when he tried to take a labor job, the boss let him go after a few days, unwilling to harbor a fraud. Michael was trapped in a vicious circle. No work, debts pressing in, a broken family, a shredded reputation. The world had turned its back. Where could he go? Who could he lean on? Every door he once pried open through deceit now slammed shut in his face. I heard he was barely surviving, and I felt no anger anymore. Only a cold satisfaction. The man who once tried to brand me a senile, useless old fool was now despised by everyone as a pathetic failure. That was the cruelest punishment of all, living as if already dead, under the scornful gaze of the world. That winter was colder than any before. In a run-down apartment on the edge of town, Michael sat hunched beside a cheap electric heater, the dim yellow light casting shadows across his gaunt face. Deep lines cut into his skin, his hair matted from weeks without a trim. The man who once strode into my house in a tailored suit now looked no different from a vagrant broken by life. His old friends were long gone. The phone no longer rang with business deals or dinner invitations, only with debt collectors, angry landlords, or curses from people he'd cheated. He didn't have the strength to answer anymore. Whenever the phone rang, he'd quietly pull the cord from the wall and let the outside world pound on the door with empty threats. At night, Michael drowned himself in cheap liquor until he passed out at the table. In his dreams, the trial replayed again and again. The judge's gavel thundered like a hammer to his chest. Justice belongs to the truth. He'd jolt awake, drenched in cold sweat, gasping like he'd just escaped the edge of a cliff. But all around him were only four mold-stained walls and the heavy silence of the dark. Anna, the wife who once trusted him completely, was now only a distant memory. His child grew older each day, out of his reach. Whenever he thought about his son calling someone else dad, it tore him apart. And then the cruel truth would hit. He had no one to blame but himself. Once, he tried to claw his way back. He applied for a job at a small company. But as soon as they ran his background check, his name lit up with the infamous fraud case that had spread across town. The manager shook his head and closed the file. As Michael walked out, he caught whispers from the staff. "That's him, the guy who forged his father-in-law's signature." He kept his head down and walked faster, each word cutting into his back like a blade. Eventually, he stopped going out altogether. He avoided people's eyes, hid from the world. Even the discount grocery store felt unbearable, the whispers trailing him everywhere. He lived on instant noodles and cheap beer, like a man society had already erased. The cruelest torment wasn't poverty, it was memory. Every time he shut his eyes, he heard my voice echoing, "Don't call me dad again." That sentence cut deeper than any punishment, a wound that never healed. He saw Anna sobbing in my arms, saw his child clinging to her, rejecting him. Those images never faded. They replayed like a broken film, robbing him of both sleep and sanity. Sometimes he tried calling Anna, but all he ever heard was the cold voice of an automated machine. "The number you've dialed is unavailable." He'd hurl the phone against the wall, the crash echoing through the empty apartment. No one came, no one cared. And so Michael, the man who once raised his glass and sneered, "Your money is ours, old man," now sat alone in the dark, with nothing but cheap liquor and the echoes of the past for company. Society had cast him out. His family had turned away. Even he himself couldn't find a reason to lift his head again. That was the real punishment. Not prison, not lost wealth, but a life buried under loneliness, shame, and the ghosts of his own making. The damp little apartment on the outskirts of town had become an invisible cage for Michael. No job, no friends, no family. The only thing left to keep him company was the past. Yet it wasn't a warm memory, but sharp fragments of regret that cut deeper every night. Every evening he sat alone at the table, draining a bottle of cheap liquor. The alcohol didn't make him forget. If anything, it made my voice echo louder in his head. "Don't call me dad again." Each time that moment replayed, his chest tightened. The father-in-law who had welcomed him into the family, trusted him with his only daughter. He had destroyed all of it for greed. Some nights his hands trembled as he picked up a pen and scribbled in an old notebook. "Edward, I was wrong. I don't deserve to call you anything anymore. I just want to apologize once, even knowing you'll never forgive me." But every letter ended the same way, ripped up, crumpled, thrown aside. He knew sending them would be useless. The distance between us wasn't just a few streets anymore. It was a chasm no bridge could cross. Memories of Anna cut even deeper. He remembered the first days they met, her smiling in the sunlight, trusting him completely. He remembered their wedding, holding her hand and promising to protect her forever. Yet he had twisted that love into a weapon, even trying to force her to take his side against her father. The price was losing the only woman who had ever truly loved him. Sometimes he tried to see his child from afar. On the rare occasions he caught a glimpse, the little one clung tightly to Anna's hand, looking at him with wary eyes, as if he were a stranger. That hurt more than any sentence a judge could hand down. He began to understand. Money could buy a facade of success, but never a child's heart. In his nightmares, Michael found himself back in the courtroom. The judge's gavel pounded. Faces turned toward him with contempt. But this time, no police officers came to lead him away. Instead, Anna turned her back and walked out, their child in tow, leaving him slumped and alone. He would wake up gasping, then break into quiet sobs in the dark. Once, in desperation, Michael dialed my number, but all he heard was the cold, automated voice. The number you have dialed is currently unavailable. He broke down like a child, collapsing onto the floor. It wasn't the cry of a grown man anymore, but the muffled sobbing of someone who had lost everything. He began tormenting himself with pointless questions. If I had stopped that day, if I'd chosen gratitude over greed, would everything be different? If I hadn't lied, would Edward have kept calling me his son? But the questions meant nothing now. The past could not be undone, and he had slammed every door shut himself. Michael knew the truth. He was living under the harshest punishment of all, a silent, endless sentence of regret. The days that followed dragged on in a dull, punishing loop for Michael. He would wake long after the sun had risen, head pounding from cheap liquor. Scattered across the table lay crumpled scraps of paper with unfinished sentences. "I'm sorry. I was wrong," words he never found the courage to send. Some days he wandered aimlessly through the streets where he once walked hand in hand with Anna. The little cafe where he had held her fingers under golden light now rang with the laughter of other couples. Michael stood silently at the corner, staring through the glass, realizing he was nothing but a shadow of the past. To the world, he was no longer the devoted husband, only the man who betrayed, who schemed, who was cast aside. Regret gnawed at him more viciously each day. Whenever he saw children playing in the street, he thought of his own, of those bright eyes once lighting up at the word "Daddy." Now, he knew his child must only say it to a fading memory, not the man who stood there hollow and broken, but to some gentler version in the past. Michael understood that his son would grow up wanting nothing to do with him. One night, deep in drink, he wrote a long letter to me. The words trembled across the page, smudged with tears. "Edward, you once called me your son. I remember those first dinners, when you set an extra place for me, when you laughed and told me to call you Dad. I remember it all, and I know I betrayed that trust. I'm sorry for my greed, sorry for the pain I caused Anna. If I could turn back time, I would ask for just one simple thing, to sit with you again in that old kitchen, sharing one ordinary meal. I don't ask for forgiveness, I don't deserve it. I only want you to know I regret it, and I will regret it for the rest of my life." But by morning, sober, he didn't send it. Instead, he burned the letter in a chipped porcelain ashtray, watching the small flame flare and die, leaving nothing but scattered ash. He feared I would read it and laugh coldly, or worse, that I wouldn't care at all. Isolation soon warped into haunting. He began to hear Anna's voice in the night wind, his child's crying hidden in the patter of rain. Sometimes he would bolt upright at midnight, stumbling to the balcony, shouting her name into the dark. But the only reply was silence. He grew gaunt, his skin sallow, his eyes sunken and lifeless. Strangers looked at him with a mix of pity and contempt. To them, he was nothing more than a living warning. Don't be greedy, or you'll end up like him. Michael came to see that regret could neither save him nor release him. It was a life sentence, harsher than any court could decree. Every morning he woke was another reminder of all he had lost to betrayal and ambition. If the law's justice had been a formal sentence, the justice of conscience was 100 times crueler, forcing him to live with disgrace, to cradle his own solitude, to plunge endlessly into memories that refused to fade. And so, Michael, the man who once raised his glass and sneered, "Your money is ours, old man," was reduced to nothing more than a broken shadow, staggering through the harshest punishment of all, regret, too late to undo, too heavy to escape. After all the storms, my life, Edward's, slowly found its way back to peace. The old wooden house, the one Mary and I once built with our own hands, still stands strong today, a reminder that some values can never be destroyed. Every morning I sit on the porch, listening to the birds, breathing in the faint scent of wood drifting in the breeze, feeling lighter than ever. Anna came back to live with me. At first she carried her own guilt, but little by little she found her smile again. She poured herself into raising her child, and she spent more time by my side. One evening she sat down at the kitchen table and said hesitantly, "Dad, I'm sorry. If I had been wiser, maybe you wouldn't have had to suffer so much." I gently patted her head and smiled. "Anna, what matters isn't the mistake. What matters is that you found your way back. I never blamed you. All I've ever wanted is for you to be happy." Those words seemed to lift a heavy weight from her heart. I saw her cry, but they were tears of release, and in that moment, I knew, as long as truth and love remain, nothing can break the bond between father and child. I also began spending more time helping others. I repaired benches for the church, built bookshelves for the library, and often visited the elderly who lived alone in town. One day, an old woman held my hand, trembling, and whispered, "Edward, you're proof that kindness never goes unrewarded." Her words brought tears to my eyes. All my life I had only known hard work with my hands. I never imagined that in my old age it would be kindness itself that became the wall protecting me through every storm. Inside my home, Mary's picture still rests on the altar. I often look at it and whisper, "Do you see, Mary? The house still stands. Anna has come home. The child is safe. We've kept the family together even through the storms. Life is not always fair, but if a man lives honestly, holding on to his dignity, then in the end, justice finds its way. I have lost much, but I have not lost what matters most, my faith in love and in the truth." As time passed, I realized the wounds in my heart were slowly healing, not because I forgot what had happened, but because I had learned how to turn pain into strength. Most afternoons I spent in my little woodworking shop. The sound of sawing, planing, and wood knocking against wood felt like an old, familiar song reminding me of my younger days. But now, I no longer work to sell. I work to give: a desk for a poor child, a simple bed for an elderly widow, or just a bench for the park where someone might sit and rest. On each piece I carved a single word: hope. Neighbors began calling me by a new name, Edward of the community. People came not only to ask me to fix a table, but also to hear my story. I never hid it. I told them about Michael, about the dark days, about how I managed to stand tall. Many listeners wept. One young mother came holding her child and whispered, "Thank you. Your story taught me not to be blinded by sweet words, and to always look at a person's true nature." Anna changed too. She grew stronger, more independent. She began joining programs that support women who had suffered emotional abuse, because she knew better than anyone what it meant to be deceived in love. Watching my daughter step out of the shadows lifted a heavy weight from my heart. As for me, I found a kind of rebirth in the strangers I helped. One afternoon, after finishing a bookshelf for the library, a little boy handed me a small card. "I don't have anything, but I just want to thank you for giving us a place to read." My hands trembled as I held it. These rough, calloused hands, hands that had known nothing but labor, were now touching the pure trust of the next generation. I came to understand. Happiness doesn't lie in money or in the possessions greedy men like Michael crave. True happiness comes from living honestly, from giving, and from being remembered for kindness. In the evenings, sitting on the porch listening to Anna and her child laugh together, I look up at the starry sky. The night wind brushes past, carrying the whisper of leaves, and in that moment, I feel reborn. No longer the old man deceived and belittled, but Edward, a father, a carpenter, a man who walked through the storm and found peace. One autumn afternoon, I sat on the porch steps, watching my grandchild run in circles, laughter carrying in the breeze. Anna sat beside me, her eyes more peaceful than I had ever seen them. Without meaning to, my thoughts drifted to Michael. Where was he now? Probably still hunched in that cramped little room, gnawed by regret and haunted by the past. I no longer felt hatred, because I understood now, a man can lose money, lose his job, even lose his freedom, but the worst loss of all is losing the trust and respect of his own family and community. That is a sentence harsher than any prison, and Michael was serving it in full. I looked over at Anna and my grandchild. Deep in my heart, the truth was clear. Family isn't just about blood. Family is where love, respect, and trust live. Without those things, even people bound by blood are strangers. I lifted my head and said to Anna, "My child, the most important lesson I've learned in life is this: money will always fade away, but love and kindness last forever. Real family isn't blood, it's respect and love." Anna squeezed my hand, her eyes shining. I knew then that she understood, and I believed my grandchild would grow up in this home carrying that lesson too. This is where my story closes, but I want you, the one reading these words, to remember one thing. Greed and deceit may bring quick rewards, but in the end they destroy everything. Only honesty, kindness, and cherishing those you love will ever bring true peace. And if you've walked with me all the way to the end of this story, leave behind some sign that you understand, a comment, a word of empathy, or even just a simple follow, because what I've shared here may feel like the end of a tragedy, but the next story will chill you even more.